Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. The February heat in Mexico City hits different when you're hauling camera equipment up 4 flights of stairs, because the elevator's been broken for God knows how long. Nathan and I had just wrapped day 3 of filming underground boxing matches in Tepito, and every muscle in my body screamed for rest. We'd picked Hotel Esperanza because it was cheap, $40 a night for a twin room, and close enough to our filming locations that we could walk. The place catered to backpackers and journalists on tight budgets, a converted colonial building with peeling yellow paint and iron balconies that looked ready to collapse. Our room was sandwiched between a German couple who argued constantly and what sounded like an empty unit on the other side. Room 412 had 2 sagging beds, a ceiling fan that clicked with every rotation, and walls so thin you could hear someone unwrapping candy 3 doors down. Nathan crashed immediately after his shower, but I stayed up editing footage on my laptop, the screen's glow mixing with the orange streetlight filtering through our threadbare curtains. The neighborhood never really slept. Motorcycles roared past, street vendors shouted about fresh tamales, and somewhere a radio played cumbia music on repeat. Around 2 a.m., I heard the door to room 414 open and close. Heavy footsteps, then lighter ones, 2 people. A man's voice, speaking English with an accent I couldn't place, maybe Eastern European. Then a woman's laugh, high and musical, the kind that suggested she'd had a few drinks. Their voices grew muffled as they moved deeper into the room. I put my headphones back on and focused on syncing audio with our boxing footage, trying to ignore the occasional thump against the wall. Hotels like Esperanza saw plenty of one-night encounters between travelers, and the last thing I wanted was to hear the inevitable conclusion of their evening. 20 minutes later, the thumping intensified. The bed frame in 414 knocked against our shared wall in an irregular rhythm. But there was something wrong with the pattern. Too erratic, too violent. The woman's voice rose sharply, not in pleasure but in what sounded like distress. I pulled off my headphones and listened. Her words were muffled but urgent, switching between English and what might have been Portuguese. The man's voice stayed low, almost a growl. Then came a crash, like someone had knocked over the bedside lamp. My finger hovered over the pause button as I debated whether to do something or mind my own business. The sounds changed. Now I could hear her gasping, choking almost. The man was speaking steadily in his accented English, calm, methodical words I couldn't make out. Another crash, this time like glass breaking. Nathan stirred in his bed but didn't wake up. The woman's sounds became more desperate, wet and gurgling. Every instinct told me to bang on the wall, to call the front desk, to do something, but I sat frozen, telling myself I was misinterpreting what I was hearing. Maybe they were just into rough play. Maybe she was throwing up from too much tequila. The human mind performs incredible gymnastics to avoid confronting the obvious, especially at 2:47 a.m. in a foreign country, where you don't speak the language fluently. Then silence. Complete, absolute silence that seemed louder than all the noise before it. No voices, no movement, not even the sound of breathing through those paper-thin walls. I waited, laptop forgotten, straining to hear anything from room 414. 5 minutes passed. 10. The normal hotel sounds continued. The clicking fan, distant motorcycle engines, the German couples snoring, but nothing from next door. I convinced myself they'd passed out, that whatever drama had unfolded was over. I saved my work, closed the laptop, and crawled into bed. Sleep came eventually, fitful and filled with dreams of muffled screams. Nathan's alarm woke us at 7. We had an 8:30 interview scheduled with a former champion who now trained kids in his garage. I stumbled to the bathroom, splashed water on my face, and tried to shake off the previous night's unease. Nathan was already dressed, checking his camera batteries and mumbling about needing better coffee than the instant packets the hotel provided. As we gathered our equipment, I heard commotion in the hallway, rapid Spanish, multiple voices, the static crackle of a radio. Through our peephole, I saw 2 police officers standing outside room 414. A hotel employee, a young woman with her hair in a tight bun, was fumbling with a massive keyring. They opened the door to 414, and immediately the woman with the keys stumbled backward, her hand flying to her mouth. One officer pushed past her into the room while the other spoke urgently into his radio. More police arrived within minutes, followed by paramedics who entered with a stretcher but emerged empty-handed. Yellow tape appeared across the doorway. A detective in a wrinkled suit began knocking on doors, asking questions in Spanish and broken English. When he reached ours, Nathan did most of the talking. We were British filmmakers. Been in the room all night. Heard some noise around 2 a.m. but thought nothing of it. The detective's eyes fixed on me when Nathan mentioned the noise. "What kind of noise?" he asked in accented English. I described what I'd heard as vaguely as possible. Some arguing, things being knocked over, then quiet. The detective wrote in his notepad without looking up. "The woman," he said slowly. "She is dead. Strangled in the bathroom. Did you hear her call for help?" The question hit me like a physical blow. Had those desperate sounds been cries for help? Had I sat there editing video while someone was being murdered inches away? I told him about the gasping sounds, the silence that followed. His expression remained neutral, but I saw judgment in his eyes. Or maybe that was my own guilt reflected back. He took our passport information and told us not to leave the city without contacting the police station. Word spread through the hotel like wildfire. By noon, half the guests had checked out early. Those who remained huddled in the lobby, sharing theories and fears. The German couple from next door claimed they'd heard nothing. A Canadian backpacker said she'd seen a tall man with a shaved head leaving through the back exit around 3 a.m., but she'd been drunk and couldn't describe him beyond that. The victim was Brazilian, traveling alone, had checked in 3 days prior. The desk clerk, an older man with yellowed teeth, mentioned she'd been friendly, always smiling, had asked about safe neighborhoods for jogging. Nobody knew about the man in her room. The security cameras, we learned, had been under maintenance for the past month. Nathan wanted to leave immediately, find another hotel, maybe cut the whole trip short. But the police had our passports and we still had 2 more days of shooting scheduled. That night we moved to a different room on the 2nd floor, but I couldn't sleep. Every sound made me jump. Footsteps in the hallway, doors closing, muffled conversations. I kept thinking about those crucial minutes when I'd sat there, paralyzed by doubt and social conditioning, while a woman died on the other side of a plasterboard wall. The police never found the man. The case made local headlines for a day or two, then disappeared into the stack of unsolved murders that pile up in any major city. We finished our documentary and flew home to London 3 days later. Nathan never mentioned that night again, but I know it haunted him too. I caught him checking locks twice, 3 times before bed. Me, I can't stay in hotels anymore without thinking about room 414. Sometimes, lying in bed at night, I still hear those sounds. The irregular thumping, the muffled gasps, and then that terrible silence. The detective had asked if I heard her call for help, and the truth is, I'll never know. Maybe those sounds were her final attempts to alert someone, anyone, that she was in danger. Maybe I could have saved her if I just picked up the phone or pounded on the wall. Or maybe I would have been the second body they found that morning. That uncertainty is what I carry with me. Not just the guilt of inaction, but the knowledge that in the moment when it mattered most, I chose to believe a comfortable lie rather than confront an uncomfortable truth. "3 years at the same accounting firm in Cleveland had me desperate for change. When Phillips and Associates called about an interview in Philadelphia, I booked the first available flight and started searching for hotels. The Whitmore Grand caught my eye immediately. A Victorian-era establishment from 1892. All marble columns and crystal chandeliers in the photos, yet somehow priced lower than the chain hotels nearby. I made the reservation for 3 nights, figuring I'd explore the city a bit after my interview. Tuesday afternoon found me pulling up to the hotel in a taxi, my stomach doing little flips of excitement. The building was even more impressive in person, with gargoyles perched on the corners and brass fixtures that probably cost more than my car. Inside, the lobby smelled like old wood and expensive perfume. A young receptionist named Bradley checked me in, sliding a brass key attached to a digital fob across the polished counter. Room 718, Ms. Thompson. The elevators are just past the lounge area. The 7th floor hallway stretched longer than I expected, lined with burgundy carpet that muffled my footsteps. My room sat at the far end, next to an emergency exit. Inside, I found that perfect mix of old and new. A 4-poster bed with a memory foam mattress, antique writing desk holding a modern coffee maker, and windows with heavy velvet curtains overlooking the city streets below. I spent 20 minutes arranging everything just right. Interview outfit hung in the closet, toiletries lined up on the bathroom counter, laptop positioned on the desk for last-minute prep work. The suitcase I zipped tight and tucked into the closet's corner. Call me paranoid, but I always worried about hotel staff going through guests' belongings. I even took a photo of how I'd arranged everything, just in case. That first night passed peacefully. I ordered room service, reviewed my portfolio, and fell asleep watching the local news talk about some upcoming festival in Rittenhouse Square. Wednesday morning hit me like a freight train. My phone alarm buzzed at 6:30, and I stumbled toward the closet to grab my running clothes. But when I unzipped my suitcase, everything was wrong. My carefully folded shirts were rolled up instead. The running shoes I'd packed on the left were now on the right. My underwear, and I know this sounds crazy, had been refolded into perfect little squares and stacked like a department store display. I stood there for a good minute, trying to make sense of it. Had I been more tired than I thought? Maybe I'd rearranged things and forgotten? I checked the photo on my phone. No, everything had definitely been moved. The door had been locked, the deadbolt engaged. Even that little swing bar latch was still in place. I told myself housekeeping must have a master key that bypassed everything. Though why would they refold my underwear? I pushed the thought aside, threw on my running gear, and headed out for a jog to clear my head. The interview went better than I could have hoped. 4 hours of presentations, technical assessments, and panel discussions, but I nailed every question. The hiring manager, Mrs. Brennan, even walked me to the elevator personally, which I took as a good sign. By the time I got back to the hotel that evening, I was riding high on adrenaline and possibility. I treated myself to dinner at the hotel restaurant, grilled salmon with asparagus, probably the fanciest meal I'd had in months. Back in my room, I decided to test a theory. Before bed, I arranged my suitcase items in a specific pattern. Shoes pointing north, shirts folded in thirds, pants rolled with the waistbands facing left. I took multiple photos from different angles. Then I did something I'd seen in a movie once. I placed a single hair across the zipper pulls. If someone opened it, the hair would fall. Satisfied with my detective work, I double-checked all the locks and climbed into bed. Thursday morning came with a sense of dread I couldn't explain. Before I even opened my eyes, I knew something would be different. Sure enough, when I checked the suitcase, the hair was gone. Inside, my clothes had been rearranged again, but this time it was almost artistic. Every item was folded with military precision and arranged by color, creating a gradient from light to dark. My running shoes were polished. The price tags I'd left on a new blouse were removed and placed in the side pocket, smoothed flat like someone had ironed them. The strangest part? A piece of hotel stationery was tucked between my shirts with a single word written in shaky handwriting. Better. My skin prickled with goosebumps. This wasn't housekeeping. I marched down to the front desk, where a different receptionist, an older woman named Dolores, listened to my story with a concerned frown. She assured me no staff had entered my room and even pulled up the electronic key log to prove it. Only my key fob had accessed the door since check-in. I spent that entire Thursday out of the room, partly because I needed to apartment hunt if I got the job, but mostly because I couldn't stand being in that space. Every coffee shop and park bench seemed safer than room 718. Around 8 that evening, I finally returned, exhausted and ready to pack up and leave first thing in the morning. I'd sleep in the airport if I had to, but when I opened the door, the air felt different, thicker somehow, like walking into a humid greenhouse. The closet door was open about 6 inches, though I distinctly remembered closing it completely. I flicked on every light in the room and approached slowly. Inside the closet, my interview outfit hung exactly where I'd left it, except now it was facing the opposite direction. The hangers were old, not the hotel's modern plastic ones, but ancient wire things that looked like they belonged in an antique shop. I grabbed my suitcase, ready to throw everything in and bolt, when I noticed something else. The closet's back wall had scratch marks in the wood, deep gouges that formed letters. Still here. That's when I heard it. A soft rustling from inside the closet, like fabric brushing against itself. The sound grew louder, more insistent, as if someone was frantically searching through clothes. But I could see everything clearly. Nothing was moving. The noise stopped abruptly when my phone rang. Mrs. Brennan's number flashed on the screen. With shaking fingers, I answered, trying to keep my voice steady as she offered me the position. 30% salary increase, full relocation package, starting in 2 weeks. Any other day, I would have been ecstatic. Instead, I mumbled a thank you and promised to call back tomorrow. The moment I hung up, the rustling returned, now accompanied by a rhythmic tapping. Fingernails on wood, steady as a heartbeat. I backed toward the door, but the deadbolt wouldn't budge. The key card reader blinked red every time I swiped. Even the emergency exit at the end of the hall, I could see its green glow through my peephole, seemed impossibly far away. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. Then, at exactly 11:17 p.m., I remember because I kept checking my phone, hoping to call for help. The closet door began to swing open. Not quickly, but with deliberate slowness, like someone savoring the moment. The hinges groaned despite the WD-40 smell that suddenly filled the room. I pressed myself against the main door, frantically entering the lock code over and over. Nothing. Through the widening gap of the closet door, I could see my clothes swaying on their hangers despite the absence of any breeze. The wire hangers clinked together, creating an almost musical sound. Then I noticed something that made my breath catch. There were more clothes in there now. Men's clothes. A brown suit that looked decades old, white shirts yellowed with age, and a pair of scuffed Oxford shoes placed neatly on the closet floor. The tapping stopped, replaced by breathing that wasn't mine. Deep, labored breaths that seemed to come from the back of the closet where those scratches spelled out their message. I did the only thing I could think of. I called 911. But instead of the dispatcher, I heard static, then a man's voice, raspy and distant. She moved my things. She always moved my things. The line went dead. My phone screen flickered and went black, completely drained despite being at 80% just minutes before. The breathing from the closet grew louder, angrier. A shadow began to form in the darkness between the hanging clothes, tall, hunched, reaching out with hands that weren't quite solid. That's when adrenaline finally overtook terror. I grabbed the bedside lamp and hurled it at the window. The glass didn't shatter like in movies. It cracked in a spiderweb pattern. I used the hotel chair to bash through, not caring about the 7-story drop. The noise must have broken whatever spell held the door because suddenly my keycard worked. The lock clicked green, and I burst into the hallway, leaving everything behind. I ran barefoot past the elevators, down 7 flights of stairs, and didn't stop until I reached the lobby. Dolores was still at the front desk, and the moment she saw me, disheveled, barefoot, probably looking absolutely insane, she rushed over. I told her everything in a jumbled mess of words. Instead of calling security or looking at me like I'd lost my mind, her face went pale. "Room 718, she whispered. "Oh, honey, no, we shouldn't have. That room's been trouble for years." She led me to the back office and pulled out an old leather ledger, flipping through yellowed pages until she found what she was looking for. Harold Winters, she read. Long-term resident from 1982 to 2014. Found dead in the closet, apparently had been there for days before anyone noticed. The coroner said natural causes, but she trailed off, then looked at me with genuine sympathy. He was obsessive about his belongings. The maids used to complain that he'd leave notes if they moved anything even an inch. After he died, we found journals full of detailed descriptions of how his clothes should be arranged. Management renovated the room but kept the same lock code because of some computer glitch. You're the first person to stay more than one night since then. Dolores called her manager, who arrived within minutes looking both apologetic and terrified of a lawsuit. They comped my entire stay, had security retrieve my belongings. Everything was folded exactly as Harold apparently preferred, according to his journals, and paid for a room at the Marriott across town. I never went back to room 718, but I did take the job in Philadelphia. During my apartment search, I made sure to ask about previous tenants and any quirks each place might have. The building manager of my eventual apartment probably thought I was paranoid when I asked for a full history of the unit, but I didn't care. 6 years later, I still live in Philly, and I love my job at Phillips & Associates. But I've never stayed in a historic hotel again. When I travel for business, I book the newest chain hotels I can find, the kind with key cards that reset every week and rooms that have no stories to tell. Sometimes colleagues tease me about my boring hotel choices. I just smile and change the subject. Last month, out of curiosity, I looked up the Whitmore Grand online. They've modernized their booking system and finally changed all their lock codes. It was mentioned in a press release about their renovation. Room 718 is now a storage area. In the comments section of their Facebook page, I found a review from 2016, a year before my stay. A businessman from Chicago wrote about his clothes being mysteriously rearranged and strange noises from the closet. The hotel's response was a generic apology and an offer for a future discount. I almost reached out to him, but what would I say? That Harold Winters is still in that room, still arranging people's belongings, still trying to make everything better. Some things are better left unshared, but every now and then, when I'm folding laundry, I catch myself arranging everything by color, creating perfect squares, making it all just right. And I remember that word written on hotel stationery, better. I throw everything back in the drawer, messily, defiantly, just to be safe. The Golden Lotus Hotel sat wedged between a noodle shop and a pharmacy on Street 136 in Phnom Penh, its yellow paint peeling like dead skin in the humid air. $22 a night got me a key attached to a wooden block heavy enough to be a weapon, and the woman at the front desk who barely glanced up from her phone as she slid it across the counter. "Room 307, third floor," she said in accented English, then added something about fumigation happening on the fourth floor after midnight. "Keep your windows closed," she warned, tapping the counter twice with her long fingernail for emphasis. The chemical smell in the lobby should have been my first warning. Not cleaning products like I'd assumed, but something sharper that made my nose burn. I'd been in Cambodia for 3 days, photographing temples and markets, my camera bag weighing down my shoulder as I climbed the narrow stairs. Each step creaked under my feet, and the handrail felt sticky with years of accumulated grime that no amount of cleaning could remove. The room itself was a monument to budget travel, walls the color of old teeth, a bed that groaned when I set my bag on it, and an air conditioner that wheezed like an asthmatic patient. The bathroom faucet dripped steadily, creating a rust stain in the sink that looked like dried blood. But after 12 hours in the scorching heat, chasing perfect shots through crowded markets, I just needed a place to upload my photos and sleep. Around 11 that night, heavy footsteps thundered past my door, followed by the metallic scraping of equipment being dragged across the floor. Through the thin walls, I could hear men speaking in rapid Khmer, their voices urgent but not quite alarmed. The peephole in my door was scratched and cloudy, but I could make out figures in white coveralls pushing industrial tanks on squeaky wheels toward the stairwell. One man's coveralls were unzipped to his waist, revealing a sweat-soaked undershirt, and the mask meant to cover his face dangled uselessly from one ear. The fumigation crew worked for another 30 minutes, their equipment clanging against walls and door frames as they moved between rooms on the floor above. I tried to focus on editing photos, a monk in saffron robes buying fruit, children playing in fountain spray near the palace, but the chemical smell kept getting stronger. It wasn't like bug spray or cleaning solution. It had a sweet, almost metallic edge that coated the back of my throat. I closed my laptop and checked that my windows were shut tight, even though the room was already stifling. The air conditioner's death rattle seemed louder now, competing with muffled voices from upstairs and the occasional hiss of pressurized gas being released. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke to complete silence, except for water dripping somewhere in the walls. My phone showed 3:47 a.m., and the chemical smell had faded to just a faint trace. I remember feeling relieved, thinking the worst was over, that I'd get a few more hours of sleep before my morning shoot at the Central Market. The screaming started at 6:15 a.m. Not a quick shriek of surprise, but a sustained, horrified wail that went on until it broke into sobbing. I jolted upright, still half asleep, trying to orient myself in the unfamiliar room. More voices joined in, rapid exchanges in Khmer, doors slamming, feet pounding up and down the stairs. Through my door, I could hear someone retching violently in the hallway. My first thought was food poisoning. Maybe the hotel restaurant had served bad fish. But then someone started shouting the same phrase over and over, and even without understanding the language, I could hear the panic. I pulled on yesterday's clothes and opened my door to find chaos. Guests in various states of undress crowded the narrow hallway, some trying to get upstairs, others pushing to get down. A young Australian couple from room 305 grabbed my arm, the woman's face pale as paper. "There's a girl dead upstairs," she said, her voice shaking. "Room 415, the door was open and she's just lying there." Against every instinct telling me to leave immediately, I found myself moving with the crowd toward the stairs. The fourth-floor hallway reeked of chemicals, so strong it made my eyes water instantly. A small cluster of people stood frozen outside room 415, and through the gaps between their bodies, I could see her. She couldn't have been older than 25, lying on her side facing the door, one arm stretched out like she'd been trying to reach for something. Her skin had a strange grayish tint, and foam had dried around her mouth and nose. What struck me most was how peaceful she looked. No signs of struggle, no twisted expression of pain, just empty eyes staring at nothing. An older German man was already on his phone with emergency services, struggling to explain the location in broken English. The hotel staff appeared within minutes, but not with the confusion you'd expect. They moved with practiced efficiency, like they'd rehearsed this. The desk woman from last night pushed through the crowd, took one look at the body, and immediately started herding guests away from the door. Two male staff members appeared with a sheet and tried to enter the room, but the German man blocked them, shouting that they couldn't touch anything until police arrived. That's when things got ugly. The desk woman's demeanor shifted completely. The polite hospitality mask dropped, replaced by something cold and calculating. She pulled out her phone and made a rapid call in Khmer, her eyes scanning our faces like she was memorizing who was there. More staff materialized from nowhere, forming a human barrier between us and the room, insisting we all return to our floors immediately. "Gas leak," one of them kept saying in English. "Accident, very sad, but you must go now for safety." But we could all smell it wasn't a gas leak. It was whatever they'd been pumping into these rooms just hours before. A British woman started recording video on her phone, and two staff members immediately moved to block her, one reaching for her device. She jerked back, shouting about her rights, and in the confusion, I saw the desk woman slip into room 415. Through the doorway, I watched her pick up something from the nightstand, a passport maybe, or a phone, and pocket it quickly. The police arrived 20 minutes later. Two officers who looked barely out of their teens, followed by a detective in a wrinkled suit who clearly didn't want to be there. They spoke at length with the hotel staff in the lobby while we were kept upstairs, forbidden from leaving, but also blocked from getting closer to room 415. The Australian woman had started a group chat with everyone who had phone signal, sharing what we'd each seen and heard. A French backpacker named Antoine said he'd met the girl yesterday at breakfast, Jenny from Seattle, traveling solo through Southeast Asia, planning to catch a bus to Siem Reap in the morning. She'd seemed healthy, happy even, showing him photos of Angkor Wat on her phone. The British woman managed to send her video to someone before the hotel's Wi-Fi mysteriously stopped working. By the time the detective finally came to take our statements, the hotel staff had clearly gotten their story straight. They insisted the fumigation company had used only approved chemicals, that the girl must have had an underlying condition, perhaps mixed medication with alcohol. But those of us who'd seen her knew better. The foam around her mouth, the gray skin, the way her fingers had clawed at the sheets. I gave my statement to the detective, who wrote nothing down and seemed more interested in whether I'd taken any photographs. When I said no, he relaxed visibly and handed me a business card with a number that, I'd later discover, belonged to a disconnected line. The German man was less cooperative, demanding to speak to someone from his embassy, insisting this was murder by negligence at minimum. The detective's English conveniently failed him at that point, and he kept repeating, "Investigation ongoing," like a broken record. Around noon, they finally removed Jenny's body, wrapped in hotel sheets rather than a proper body bag, carried down the back stairs while we were corralled in the lobby. The desk woman circulated among us, offering compensation, free night stay, refunded bookings, even cash for those who needed to continue their travels immediately. Her message was clear without being stated. Take the money and leave quietly. Several guests accepted, gathering their belongings and disappearing into waiting taxis. Those of us who remained were moved to different rooms on the second floor, far from the fourth floor and its lingering chemical smell. That night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep in the new room they'd given me. Every sound in the walls made me think of gas seeping through cracks. Every odd smell sent me checking the windows. Around 2 a.m., I heard a soft knock on my door. The Australian couple from before, looking haggard. They'd been doing their own investigation, talking to a cleaner who spoke some English. According to him, the hotel had hired the cheapest fumigation company they could find, one that had been banned from working in several provinces for safety violations. The chemicals they used were industrial grade, meant for warehouses and shipping containers, never residential buildings. The fourth floor's ventilation system had been broken for months, but fixing it would have meant closing that floor and losing revenue. The cleaner said this wasn't the first incident. 6 months ago, a Korean tourist had been hospitalized with severe respiratory problems after staying in room 418, but the hotel had paid off the family to keep quiet. He'd only talked to them because he was quitting anyway, too scared to keep working there after seeing Jenny's body. The Australian woman, Claire, had been researching on her phone and found that mixing certain fumigation chemicals with the mold-killing treatments commonly used in old buildings could create hydrogen cyanide gas. The three of us decided to leave at dawn, but first we needed evidence. The British woman who'd filmed earlier had already checked out, but she'd shared her video in the group chat before the Wi-Fi went down. I had a portable router in my camera bag. Photographer's habit, never trust local internet. And we huddled in my room trying to upload everything we had. Claire had photographed the fumigation tank's labels before staff moved them. Antoine had recorded audio of the desk woman trying to bribe him, and I had shots of the hallway showing the chemical residue on the walls, a white crystalline substance that had formed where the gas had condensed. We sent everything to news outlets, embassies, anyone we could think of. The desk woman must have been monitoring something because within minutes, someone was pounding on my door. We didn't answer, just kept uploading until they used a master key. 3 large men entered, not hotel security, but something else. The kind of muscle you hire when you need problems to disappear. They demanded our phones, cameras, everything. When we refused, one of them grabbed Claire's wrist hard enough to make her cry out. That's when the German man appeared in the doorway with 2 police officers. Real ones this time, not the kids from the morning. He'd actually reached his embassy, and they'd sent help. The confrontation in that cramped hotel room lasted only minutes, but felt like hours. The German embassy officers spoke in firm, authoritative English, demanding the men leave immediately, and stating that any harm to foreign nationals would result in international incident. The muscle backed off, but not before one of them said something in Khmer to Claire that made her face go white. The German man, Wolfgang, had arranged for cars to take us directly to the embassy district. As we packed frantically, I could hear commotion throughout the hotel, doors slamming, raised voices, the sound of luggage being dragged downstairs. The story was spreading despite their efforts to contain it. In the taxi, Claire finally translated what the man had said to her. "The dead don't speak, and neither should you." The driver kept glancing at us in the mirror, and I noticed he took several unnecessary turns before Wolfgang told him in sharp German to take the direct route. At the German embassy, we gave detailed statements to actual investigators who took notes, made copies of our evidence, and assured us the matter would be pursued through proper channels. They helped us book flights out that same day. None of us wanted to spend another night in Phnom Penh. 6 weeks later, I received an email from Claire with a link to a news article in Khmer. Wolfgang had translated it for her. The Golden Lotus Hotel had been closed for renovations just days after we left. The fumigation company had disappeared entirely, their business license revoked but no arrests made. Jenny's death was officially listed as misadventure, with no mention of toxic chemicals or negligence. Her family in Seattle had been told she died of an allergic reaction, and the embassy had handled the repatriation of her body quietly. But the article mentioned something else. 2 more deaths at budget hotels in the same district over the following month, both involving young travelers, both occurring after late-night maintenance work. Claire had started a blog documenting everything, warning backpackers about the danger, but it kept getting taken down. The photos I'd taken that night remained on my hard drive, too damning to delete but too dangerous to share openly. Sometimes I still wake up at 3:47 a.m., the exact time I'd woken that night in room 307, and I can smell that sweet metallic scent. I've stayed in hundreds of hotel rooms since then, but I always check for chemical residue on the walls, always prop windows open regardless of the temperature, always sleep with my passport and phone within arm's reach. Jenny from Seattle was 23 years old, had a butterfly tattoo on her ankle, and died alone in a room full of poison while men in inadequate safety gear counted their money 1 floor below. That's the part that haunts me most, how preventable it was, how many people knew the danger and chose profit over a young woman's life. I'd been driving for 14 hours straight when the radiator blew. Nashville was still 3 hours away, and there I was, stranded on some forgotten stretch of highway in rural Tennessee. The dashboard clock showed 9:47 p.m., and the nearest town according to my GPS was a place called Millbrook, population 892. I'm a software developer from Denver, and I was heading to a tech conference, one of those mandatory networking things my boss insisted would be career-changing. At 29, I'd made this cross-country drive twice before without incident. But that night in late October 2022, everything went wrong in ways I still can't fully explain. The only lodging option in Millbrook was a place called the Starlight Motor Inn, one of those single-story motels that probably hadn't been renovated since the 70s. Faded turquoise doors, flickering neon sign with half the letters burnt out, and a parking lot with more potholes than asphalt. The woman at the front desk had silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and wore thick glasses that magnified her eyes to an unsettling degree. She barely looked up from her crossword puzzle when I walked in, just slid a registration form across the counter and mumbled something about checkout being at 11. The room key she handed me was attached to a heavy plastic diamond with 107 etched into it. I remember thinking it was strange how cold the key felt, like it had been sitting in a freezer. Room 107 was at the far end of the building, past an ice machine that hummed and rattled like it was fighting for its life. The door stuck when I tried to open it, and I had to shoulder it hard to get inside. The room smelled like old cigarettes masked by cheap air freshener, that artificial pine scent that burns your nostrils. Brown carpet, wood-paneled walls, and a bed with a comforter covered in some geometric pattern that probably looked modern in 1983. I dropped my bag on the luggage rack and immediately called the mechanic the desk clerk had recommended. He said he could get the part in the morning but wouldn't be able to work on it until noon. I resigned myself to spending at least one night in this dump. After grabbing dinner at the only restaurant in town, a greasy diner that served everything deep-fried, I returned to the room around 10:30. I showered in the cramped bathroom with its rust-stained tub, watched some mindless TV, and was asleep by midnight. That's when things started getting weird. At exactly 2:30 a.m., I woke up to the sound of wood scraping against wood. In my groggy state, it took me a moment to process what I was hearing. The chair from the small desk by the window was moving, not just shifting slightly. I could hear it being dragged slowly across the carpet. My eyes adjusted to the darkness, and I could make out its silhouette. The chair had moved about 3 feet from where I'd left it, now positioned to face the bed. I flicked on the bedside lamp and sat up, heart pounding. The room was empty except for me. I checked the door, still locked, chain still in place. The window was sealed shut, painted over so many times it couldn't open if you tried. No connecting door to another room. I even looked under the bed like a scared kid, finding nothing but dust bunnies and a forgotten sock from some previous guest. I told myself it must have been a dream, maybe combined with the building settling. Old places make weird noises, right? I pushed the chair back to the desk, double-checked the door lock, and eventually fell back into an uneasy sleep. The next morning, I mentioned it casually to the desk clerk, same woman from the night before. "Weird thing happened last night," I said, while settling my bill for another night. "Thought I heard furniture moving around in my room." She didn't even pause her crossword puzzle, just said in this flat monotone, "Old building, pipes make all kinds of noises." But here's what bothered me. She never asked which room I was in, never suggested I might want a different room, never even looked up. Just kept filling in those little squares with her pencil, pressing so hard I could hear the graphite scratching against paper. I spent most of that day at the mechanic's shop, watching him replace the radiator hose and check for other damage. By the time he finished, it was past 6 in the evening, too late to make it to Nashville before the conference registration closed. I'd have to stay another night and leave at dawn. This time, though, I came prepared. I downloaded a sound recording app on my phone, one of those ones that activates when it detects noise above a certain threshold. If something happened again, I'd have proof. I also wedged the desk chair under the doorknob as an extra precaution and pushed the dresser a few inches to partially block the bathroom door. That night, I fought sleep for as long as I could, browsing Reddit and watching YouTube videos until my eyes burned. Around 1 a.m., exhaustion won. I set my phone on the nightstand with the recording app running and drifted off. The notification sound woke me at 3:47 a.m. The app had captured something, multiple somethings actually. My mouth went dry as I scrolled through the recordings. The first one, time-stamped at 2:28 a.m., was the unmistakable sound of a key turning in a lock, then the door opening, which should have been impossible with the chair wedged against it. The chair was still there, undisturbed, but the recording clearly captured the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps walking from the door to the center of the room. The second recording made my chest tighten. It was a voice. Male. Definitely male. Whispering. The audio was grainy, but I could make out the rhythm of words even if I couldn't understand them. It sounded like someone reading from a list, the same cadence over and over. Then came the worst part. At 2:31 a.m., the recording picked up the sound of someone sitting down, that distinctive creak of old springs compressing, like someone had just settled into the chair by the window. The same chair I'd found facing my bed the night before. The recording ran for another 12 minutes, capturing occasional whispers and what sounded like fingers drumming on wood. I didn't wait for sunrise. I threw everything into my bag, not caring that my clothes were scattered everywhere. But when I yanked open the door to leave, the desk clerk was standing right there in the hallway, not walking by, just standing there in her nightgown and those same thick glasses, arms hanging at her sides. "Checking out early?" she asked, and I swear her mouth barely moved. I pushed past her without answering, practically ran to my car. The engine turned over on the first try, thank God. As I peeled out of the parking lot, I glanced in the rearview mirror. She was still standing in the doorway of room 107, watching me leave. I made it to Nashville in record time, driving like a maniac and checking my mirrors constantly. The conference was a blur. I couldn't focus on any of the presentations. That night in my normal hotel room downtown, I couldn't stop thinking about those recordings. I had proof that something impossible had happened, but who would believe me? On a whim, I searched for reviews of the Starlight Motor Inn online. TripAdvisor had 3 reviews, all 1 star, all mentioning strange noises and uncomfortable experiences. But when I refreshed the page an hour later, those reviews were gone. I tried Yelp, Google, even some obscure travel forums. Every negative review mentioning anything unusual had vanished within hours of me finding it. I became obsessed. For weeks, I dug deeper into the Starlight Motor Inn. I found a news archive from 1994 about a traveling salesman named Robert Hutchinson, who died in room 107. Suicide, they said, though the details were sparse. Then I discovered something that made everything click. The motel had changed ownership 6 times since 1994, always selling for way below market value. The current owner? A company called Midnight Holdings, LLC. When I traced the paperwork, the registered agent was listed as Mrs. Eleanor Vance, the same name as the desk clerk. But here's the thing. Eleanor Vance had legally died in 1996. I finally understood why she never wanted anyone to change rooms. Whatever was in 107, she was feeding it guests, night after night, keeping it contained to that one room. I never went back to verify my theory. Some doors, once you've escaped through them, should stay closed forever. The pharmaceutical company I work for sends me all over the Southeast to meet with rural clinics about our new diabetes medication. Last month, they had me driving through the backwoods of Georgia, hitting tiny towns most people have never heard of. I'm 34, been doing this job for 6 years, and I actually enjoy the solitude of these trips. Gives me time to catch up on podcasts and audiobooks. The town I was headed to, Copperville, only had about 800 people and 1 traffic light. My GPS kept losing signal as I drove deeper into pine country, past abandoned gas stations and rusted farm equipment slowly being swallowed by kudzu vines. The meeting wasn't until the next morning, so I needed somewhere to crash for 2 nights. The Pineview Motor Lodge sat about 3 miles outside town, a single-story strip of rooms painted mint green with white trim that had seen better days. What caught my eye was their sign: "Clean rooms, fair prices, no cameras. We respect your privacy." I thought it was a weird selling point, but after staying in so many chain hotels with security cameras in every hallway, the idea of some old-fashioned privacy actually sounded nice. The office smelled like cigarettes and pine sol when I walked in. Behind the desk sat a woman in her 50s with dyed auburn hair and acrylic nails that clicked against her keyboard. She introduced herself as Brenda, the owner, and seemed thrilled to have a guest. "We don't get many business travelers," she said, sliding a paper registration form across the counter. "Most folks just pass through on their way to Atlanta." She gave me room 12, right in the middle of the building. The key was attached to a heavy plastic diamond with the room number etched into it. No key cards here. As I pulled my rolling suitcase across the cracked parking lot, I noticed only 2 other cars: a beat-up Ford pickup and a silver sedan with local plates. The room itself was exactly what you'd expect from a roadside motel built in the 70s. Wood paneling on the walls, orange and brown geometric carpet that had probably been there since opening day, and a quilted bedspread with mysterious stains I tried not to think about. But it was clean enough, the AC worked, and the shower had decent pressure. I ordered pizza from the only place in town that delivered, watched some terrible reality TV, and crashed early. The first night passed without incident. I woke up at 6, grabbed coffee and a stale Danish from the motel office, and drove to my meeting at the Copperville Community Health Center. The presentation went well. The clinic director seemed interested in our patient assistance program, and I was back at the motel by 4 in the afternoon. That's when things started getting strange. I decided to rearrange the furniture a bit so I could use the desk more comfortably for my laptop. When I went to adjust the dresser mirror to reduce the glare from the window, I noticed it didn't sit flush against the wall like it should. There was maybe a 1/4-inch gap, and the mirror seemed to be mounted on some kind of bracket rather than hung normally. I'm not usually paranoid, but something about that mirror bothered me. Maybe it was because the motel specifically advertised having no cameras, which now seemed like protesting too much. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, angling it behind the mirror through the gap. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, just wall and the back of the mirror mount. But then I noticed a tiny dark circle, no bigger than a pencil eraser, positioned right at eye level. My chest tightened as I leaned in closer. It was definitely a lens, the kind you see in those spy shop catalogs, designed to be invisible unless you're really looking for it. I stepped back and studied the mirror's position. It gave a perfect view of the entire room: the bed, the bathroom door, the shower if you left the door open. I should have left right then. Should have packed my stuff, demanded a refund, and found somewhere else to stay. But anger overtook my common sense. How many people had stayed in this room? How many had undressed in front of this mirror, thinking they had privacy? I thought about calling the police immediately, but I wanted more evidence first. Using my phone's camera on macro mode, I took several photos of the hidden lens. Then I started examining the rest of the room more carefully. The smoke detector looked normal, but when I stood on the bed to check it, I found another tiny lens tucked into the side vent. My stomach churned as I realized whoever set this up had multiple angles covered. The anger burning in my chest made me reckless. Instead of leaving, I decided to investigate further. I grabbed my car keys and walked outside, pretending to get something from my vehicle while actually scanning the motel's layout. The office windows were mirrored. You couldn't see inside during the day. Behind the main building, I spotted a door marked "Employees Only, Laundry Facilities." It was propped open with a brick, and I could hear the rumble of industrial washers inside. I glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then slipped through the door. The laundry room was cramped and humid, with 3 massive washing machines and 2 dryers running continuously. But what caught my attention was another door at the back, painted the same beige as the wall, almost invisible if you weren't looking for it. That door was locked, but it was an old pin tumbler lock, the kind I'd learned to pick in college when I'd gotten locked out of my dorm one too many times. I still carried a basic pick set in my laptop bag, a habit from my younger, more adventurous days. It took me about 3 minutes of fumbling before I heard the satisfying click. The door opened into a narrow hallway that smelled like dust and electronics. My heart hammered against my ribs as I used my phone's flashlight to navigate. The hallway led to another door, this one unlocked. When I pushed it open, I nearly dropped my phone. The room was filled with monitors, recording equipment, and stacks of external hard drives. 8 screens showed live feeds from different rooms, including mine. I could see my laptop still open on the desk, my suitcase in the corner. The setup was more sophisticated than I'd expected from a rundown motel in rural Georgia. Each monitor was labeled with a room number, 12, 8, 6, and 4 others I couldn't make out. On one screen, I watched an elderly man unpacking his suitcase, completely unaware he was being recorded. File cabinets lined one wall, and when I pulled open a drawer, I found dozens of USB drives, each labeled with dates going back 3 years. Some had additional notes: honeymoon couple, single woman blonde, businessman, multiple nights. My skin prickled with disgust and fear. This wasn't just some creepy motel owner getting their kicks. This was organized, methodical. I grabbed several of the USB drives as evidence and started taking photos of everything. The monitors, the equipment, the filing system. I needed to document all of this before calling the police. Then I heard footsteps in the laundry room. Heavy boots on concrete getting closer. I quickly pocketed the USB drives and looked for another exit, but there wasn't one. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. I held my breath, pressing myself against the wall behind a file cabinet. The door handle turned slowly, and Brenda walked in, humming some country song under her breath. She didn't see me at first. Her attention was on the monitors. She sat down in the office chair and started clicking through files on one of the computers. That's when I noticed the baseball bat leaning against the desk within her easy reach. I needed to get out of there before she spotted me, but I was trapped between her and the only exit. I stayed frozen behind the file cabinet for what felt like hours, but was probably only 2 or 3 minutes. Brenda was focused on transferring files from one of the computers to a portable hard drive, occasionally making notes in a ledger. My legs were starting to cramp from crouching, and I knew I couldn't stay hidden much longer. Then my salvation came in the form of a bell ringing from the front office. A new guest had arrived. Brenda cursed under her breath, set down the hard drive, and hurried out, leaving the door slightly ajar. The second I heard her footsteps fade down the hallway, I bolted. I ran through the laundry room, out the back door, and didn't stop until I reached my car. My whole body was trembling as I fumbled with my keys, started the engine, and peeled out of that parking lot like the place was on fire. I drove straight to the police station in Copperville, burst through the doors, and told the desk sergeant everything. At first, he seemed skeptical, probably thought I was some paranoid city person. But when I showed him the photos on my phone and handed over the USB drives I'd taken, his expression changed completely. Within an hour, the state police were involved. They raided the Pineview Motor Lodge that night and found exactly what I'd described, plus more. The hidden room contained over 2,000 hours of footage dating back 4 years. Brenda and her son, who helped maintain the cameras, were arrested on multiple charges including voyeurism, wire fraud, and interstate trafficking of illegal recordings. They'd been selling the footage online to perverts around the world. The story made national news for about a week. As for me, I couldn't sleep properly for months. Even now in hotel rooms, I check every mirror, every smoke detector, every suspicious gap in the furniture. The company gave me a different territory after that, said I'd been through enough. They were right about that. Downtown St. Louis gets quiet after midnight, especially in January when the cold keeps even the diehards indoors. I'd been cleaning rooms at the Grandview Hotel for just over 8 months, long enough to learn which floorboards creaked and which doors stuck. The place was a relic from the 1940s, all faded wallpaper and brass fixtures that hadn't been polished since Reagan was in office. Most of our guests paid cash weekly, kept their heads down, and didn't complain about the radiators that clanged like ghost chains all night. My shift ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., and usually the biggest excitement was finding someone passed out in the hallway or dealing with a clogged toilet. Everything changed the night I found Marissa's notebook. She'd been the cleaner before me, just vanished one day according to the day manager, Frank. Left her last paycheck and everything. I discovered it wedged behind the supply closet's water heater while reaching for a dropped bottle of bleach. The cover was warped from moisture, but inside, her handwriting was still clear. Page after page of dates, room numbers, and notes about incidents. That's what she called them. My first instinct was to toss it, but something about the way she'd organized everything, the methodical documentation, made me pause. She'd been tracking something, and whatever it was had been important enough to hide. I sat on an overturned mop bucket and started reading under the supply closet's harsh bulb. The first entry was from 2014. Room 237, Mr. K. Daniels, overdose, found by housekeeping at 2:47 p.m. Then another from 2016. Room 237, Ms. J. Reeves, suicide by hanging, discovered during welfare check. My chest tightened as I kept reading. Room 237 appeared again and again. 2017. Room 237, domestic dispute, female guest deceased, male in custody. 2018. Room 237, overdose, name withheld pending notification. Each entry included newspaper clippings taped to the pages, obituaries, police blotter mentions. Marissa had been thorough. The pattern was impossible to ignore. 7 deaths in the same room over 10 years. The notebook shook in my hands as I reached the final entries. Marissa had started digging deeper, noting strange details. Every death had occurred between 2 and 4 a.m. Each victim had checked in alone, even the couple involved in the domestic incident. They'd booked separate rooms initially. She'd drawn diagrams of the room, marked where each body was found. They'd all died in the bathroom, every single one. The last page, dated just 3 days before she disappeared, had only one line. Brought evidence to Mr. Garrison. He said to forget what I found or find another job. Mr. Garrison was the hotel owner, a man I'd only seen twice in my 8 months there. Under that, in different ink, she'd written, "Can't let this go. Meeting with him tonight to show him everything." I should have put the notebook back, should have finished my shift and forgotten about it. But Marissa had been on to something, and now she was gone. The smart thing would be to leave it alone, but I kept thinking about those 7 people, all dying in the same bathroom, all in the middle of the night. What were the odds? I tucked the notebook into my cart under the extra trash bags and headed up to the 2nd floor. Room 237 was on my cleaning list tonight. It always was when it was vacant, which was often. Guests complained about the room even when they didn't know its history. Said the air felt heavy. The bathroom faucet dripped no matter how tight you turned it. And the mirror, well, the mirror always looked foggy, like someone had just taken a hot shower. The hallway stretched before me, dimly lit by those old sconces that threw more shadows than light. Each step on the worn carpet seemed louder than usual. When I reached 237, I noticed the door was already ajar, which was wrong. I always locked rooms after cleaning, and according to the chart, no one had checked in. The smell hit me first, that thick, metallic scent mixed with something chemical, like bleach but sharper. I pushed the door open with my foot, and the hinges groaned. The room was dark except for a sliver of light from the bathroom. The door was cracked open, and I could hear water running. Not the usual drip from the faucet, but a steady stream, like someone had left the tap on full blast. My legs felt like concrete as I moved toward the bathroom, every instinct screaming at me to turn around and leave. The bathroom door swung open at my touch, and what I saw made me stumble backward. The sink was overflowing, water cascading onto the cracked tile floor. But it wasn't just water. It had a pinkish tinge, swirling down toward the drain in lazy spirals. Written on the mirror in what looked like lipstick were the words, "They knew," the same shade of pink as the water. I fumbled for my phone, hands trembling as I tried to focus the camera. Evidence. I needed evidence like Marissa had collected. The flash went off, illuminating the room for a split second, and in that moment I saw something else. Behind the shower curtain, a shadow that shouldn't have been there. It wasn't moving, just standing perfectly still, human-shaped but wrong somehow, too tall, too thin. I backed out of the bathroom, keeping my eyes on that shower curtain. The shadow hadn't moved, but I could feel it watching me. My cart was still in the hallway, Marissa's notebook hidden inside. I grabbed it and ran for the elevator, not caring about the water I was tracking or the doors I left open. The elevator took forever, mechanical grinding echoing through the empty shaft. When I finally reached the lobby, Frank was at the desk, reading a newspaper like nothing was wrong. "Everything all right?" he asked without looking up. I wanted to tell him about the room, the message, the shadow, but remembered Marissa's last entry. She'd trusted the wrong person. "Just need some air," I managed to say, heading for the employee break room. I had to think, had to figure out who I could trust with this. The break room was empty, just the hum of the old refrigerator and the tick of the wall clock showing 2:47 a.m. I spread Marissa's notebook on the scratched table, comparing her notes to the photos on my phone. That's when I noticed something she'd missed, or maybe hadn't lived long enough to document. Each victim's check-in time was exactly 48 hours before their death. Down to the minute. I flipped through the hotel's registration records I'd grabbed from behind the front desk. Marissa had taught me where Frank kept the spare key. Mr. K. Daniels checked in at 2:47 a.m., died at 2:47 a.m. 2 days later. Ms. J. Reeves, 3:15 a.m. check-in, 3:15 a.m. death. The pattern held for every single one. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop digging or join them. You have 20 minutes to leave, don't come back." My throat went dry. Someone was watching, had been watching this whole time. I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate. The break room door didn't have a lock. I shoved the notebook into my bag and looked for another exit, but there was only one way out. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. The handle turned slowly, and Frank peered in, but his face was different. His eyes were flat, emotionless, like whatever was behind them had checked out long ago. "Mr. Garrison wants to see you," he said in a monotone voice. "Says you found something that belongs to him." I gripped my bag tighter. "I'm actually not feeling well. Think I need to head home." Frank stepped fully into the room, and I saw the gun tucked into his waistband. Wasn't a request. He's waiting in his office. 4th floor. The 4th floor was supposed to be closed for renovations, had been for years. "Come on," Frank said, gesturing toward the door. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." We took the service elevator, the one that barely worked and smelled like mold. Frank stood behind me the whole time, not saying a word. When the doors opened on the 4th floor, I understood why it had been closed. It wasn't under renovation at all. The hallway was pristine, like stepping back in time to when the hotel was new. Fresh paint, polished floors, working lights. At the end of the hall, a door stood open. Mr. Garrison's office. Frank nudged me forward with the gun. Inside, Garrison sat behind a mahogany desk, a man in his 70s with liver spots on his hands and cold gray eyes. "You found Marissa's notebook," he said. It wasn't a question. On his desk were stacks of cash, ledgers, and what looked like rental agreements. "Sit down." I remained standing. "Room 237 pays for this entire hotel," he continued. "Certain people need a place where questions aren't asked, where problems disappear. That room has served its purpose for decades." "You're covering up murders," I said, my voice barely steady. Garrison laughed, a dry sound like paper rustling. "Covering up? No, facilitating. Do you know how much someone will pay for a room where they know the death will be ruled natural causes? Where the coroner is already paid off? Where the cleaning crew knows to wait exactly 48 hours before entering?" My stomach churned. The pattern suddenly made sense. "You're running a murder-for-hire service. The victim, they were lured there." He nodded. "Their drinks were drugged downstairs. They'd stumble up to the room, pass out, and nature took its course. Or rather, our clients did. The bathroom was specially soundproofed in 1987. He stood up, walking to the window. "Marissa couldn't leave well enough alone. Neither can you, apparently." Frank moved closer, and I knew I had seconds to act. I grabbed the heavy glass paperweight from Garrison's desk and swung it at Frank's hand. The gun went off, the sound deafening in the small room, but the bullet went wide. I ran, Garrison shouting behind me, Frank cursing as he nursed his hand. The service elevator was too slow. I hit the stairs, taking them 2 at a time, Marissa's notebook bouncing in my bag. Behind me, I could hear Frank's heavy footfalls. 3 floors down, my legs burning, lungs screaming for air. I burst through the emergency exit into the alley behind the hotel. My car was parked 2 blocks away, but I couldn't risk going back for it. Instead, I ran toward the 24-hour diner on the corner where there would be witnesses, people, safety. I called 911 from the diner's bathroom, hands shaking as I explained everything to the dispatcher. Within 20 minutes, the place was swarming with cops. I gave them Marissa's notebook, showed them the photos on my phone, told them about Garrison's confession. They found Frank trying to leave through the hotel's loading dock. Garrison was still in his office, calmly destroying documents when they arrested him. The story broke 3 days later. 7 confirmed murders over 10 years, possibly more they were still investigating. The coroner who'd signed off on the deaths was arrested, along with 2 other hotel employees who'd helped coordinate the killings. They found Marissa's body in the hotel's old coal cellar, buried under fresh concrete. She'd been killed the same night she confronted Garrison. Room 237 became evidence, cordoned off with yellow tape while forensics went through every inch. I testified at the trial, sitting in that courtroom for weeks as they laid out the whole sick operation. Garrison got life without parole. Frank got 25 years. The hotel was shut down, eventually demolished. They built a parking garage there instead. Sometimes I drive by and I can still see the old place in my mind, can still smell that mix of pine sol and decay. I never went back to hotel work. These days I clean office buildings, nice modern places with security cameras and plenty of witnesses. But I still check the obituaries, still notice when deaths happen at hotels. And I always avoid room 237, no matter where I'm staying. It was during a spring trip my university organized for architecture students. 4 nights in New Orleans, cheap hotel, walking tours, beignets, the usual. I wasn't there for the party scene like most of the others. I was genuinely into old buildings, preservation, floor plans, those little plaques you see on brick walls with the year it was built. So when we got assigned rooms at this budget hotel a few blocks from the quarter, I actually didn't mind that it looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. Faded carpet, walls that used to be white, and elevators that made a sound like they were exhaling before every floor. My room was on the 3rd floor, right at the end of a long hallway that dead-ended at a big red fire exit door. It had one of those silver panic bars and a chipped window above it with safety glass. Across from my door was another room, room 306. The plaque said temporarily closed for renovation, and there was yellow tape crisscrossed over the knob, the kind they use for painting jobs. I assumed they were just storing junk in there or fixing a leak. Nobody talked about it, nobody even glanced at it. But the second night, something weird happened. I got back late around 11, and as I was about to swipe my key card, I heard the fire door click open behind me. I turned my head, expecting another student maybe sneaking in from a smoke break, but instead this tall man stepped out. He wasn't dressed like a guest. Plain gray work pants, a wrinkled green windbreaker, and black shoes that looked like they'd been scrubbed too clean. He walked fast, head slightly lowered, and before turning the knob of room 306, he looked both directions down the hallway, like he was crossing a street. Then he went inside, pulled the door shut behind him, and that was it. I stood there for a second longer than I should have, holding my key card mid-air. I didn't tell anyone right away. It felt too thin to report. Maybe he worked maintenance. Maybe the tape was just for show. But then it happened again. And again. Always around the same time. Not exactly to the minute, but always within that window between 10:45 and 11:10. I'd hear the fire exit click, the quiet squeak of his shoes on the waxed floor, and that quick glance over his shoulder before slipping into room 306. The lights never turned on under the door. No sound ever came from the room. It was just this strange ritual. And the weirdest part? I never saw him come back out. By the 4th night, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Curiosity had turned into anxiety. I started timing things. I'd pretend to scroll on my phone near the door, pretending to wait for someone. I even left my TV on mute so I could listen for the fire door. And sure enough, at 10:56, I heard it again. This time, I stepped closer. Not enough to be seen, just enough to peek around the corner. Same man, same clothes. Only this time, I noticed something different. He was carrying something. A bag. Not the kind you sling over your shoulder, a rolling suitcase. Black, shiny and silent as he glided it behind him into the room that supposedly wasn't being used. That night I didn't sleep much. I lay there replaying the scene in my head, wondering if I should have done something. But what? Call the front desk and say I saw a guy go into a storage room with luggage? I eventually got up, went down to the lobby around 2 a.m. and casually brought it up to the guy at reception, a younger dude named Kyle, I think. I told him I thought maybe someone was using one of the out-of-order rooms because I kept seeing someone go in there at night. He didn't even blink, said, "Oh, no one's assigned to that one. It's under renovation. Probably a contractor storing tools." That was it. Then he went back to watching something on his phone. I left feeling like I'd made a fool of myself, but it didn't feel right. The guy wasn't carrying tools. And who uses the fire exit every night like clockwork, looking around like they're waiting to get caught? I started to notice little things I hadn't before. There were no sounds of construction during the day. No carts, no workers, no movement. Just that taped-up door across from mine, quiet and still until nightfall. Once I left a tiny piece of paper against the doorframe just to see if it would get disturbed. It was gone the next morning. Nothing else around it was touched. That's when I realized someone was watching us, watching the hallway, watching when people were coming or going. The next day, most of the group had planned a river tour. I faked a stomach bug and stayed behind. Around noon, I decided to knock, just once, lightly. No answer. I pressed my ear against the door, nothing. Then I tried the knob, still locked. But the tape wasn't sealed anymore. It had been peeled and gently stuck back on. I could see where the adhesive had lost some grip and hung loose at the corner. That's when I pulled my phone out and took a picture. I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but it felt like something I might need later. I didn't want to be the kind of person who ignored signs just because they were inconvenient to believe. That night was different. I had my phone fully charged, camera ready, and I sat in the chair by the door with the lights off, just waiting. I didn't tell anyone, not my roommate, not the group chat. I knew if I said it out loud, someone would either mock me or convince me I was being paranoid. At exactly 10:58, I heard it again. That slow, careful press of the fire exit bar. The door hissed shut and the hallway fell silent. I held my breath and moved just enough to peek through the peephole, and there he was again. But this time, he wasn't alone. He was dragging the suitcase, yes, but it looked heavier. He paused longer outside the door, checked the hallway twice, and then unlocked room 306 with a key. The door opened, and as it did, I saw a glimpse of something inside that made me step back. Not furniture, not tools. A mattress on the floor. Just that. I didn't sleep at all that night. First thing the next morning, I went back to the front desk. Different guy this time. Older, looked more alert. I asked again about room 306, said I saw someone entering it repeatedly at night. This time he checked his screen, hesitated, then said, "That room isn't active, it's supposed to be sealed." I asked if they could check it. He said he'd send someone up later, but something about his tone made me realize he wasn't going to. So I walked straight back to my room, grabbed my stuff, and left. Checked out early and didn't say a word to anyone from my group. I ended up crashing at a friend's dorm across town for the last night of the trip. 3 days later, back home, I saw a local New Orleans news story circulating on social media. A human trafficking operation had been uncovered in a hotel, not far from the quarter, no names released yet. The report said it had been going on for months. People being moved quietly, mostly at night, through fire exits to avoid cameras. I checked the background in one of the images they blurred on TV, and even with the edits, I recognized the pattern in the hallway carpet. Same place, same floor. And the room number partially visible in one of the screenshots? It ended in a 6. I never told the police. I don't know if I should have. I wasn't hurt. I didn't actually see anything happen, and maybe someone else gave them the tip. But I still think about that door across from mine, about the woman or girl or whoever it was in that suitcase, and how someone could pass me in a hallway like that, every night, completely unnoticed. I wish I'd knocked harder. I wish I'd had the nerve to open the door. But the truth is, I didn't want to find out what I already suspected. Not then. Maybe not even now.